China is growing at 5% per year, while Europe is only growing at 1%. China produces 72% of all electric vehicles in the world. Every second car in China is electric, while in Europe it's every fourth car. China has over 50,000 kilometers of high-speed rail, while Europe has only 12,000. In mathematics, Chinese students have 3 times more top performers compared to those in Europe. China produces over 30% of the world's goods. That's more than Europe and the USA combined.
And what about infrastructure in China? What is the difference between their roads and ours?
A tunnel that they built in 2 months, we can't build in 10 years in Bulgaria.
What do you think about the media in China?
I think they are completely filtered. There, you have no chance to do anything outside of the filtration. There is complete control over Google, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok.
Is it true that you have a girlfriend from China?
Yes, I mentioned you several times.
Does she know English? How do you actually communicate?
The truth is, she doesn't know English. We communicate through Google Translate in real time and mainly through artificial intelligence.
What are the 3 things you, as a European, wouldn't like in China?
I couldn't get used to the food. I miss Bulgarian ayran. I miss our salads. I miss the sweets. I miss having salt on the table. The second thing is that no one speaks English. I had to start learning Chinese now. The language barrier is serious. They don't understand, and we don't understand them. The third thing that really bothered me is the control, because no matter what you say, you're walking down the street and a little machine with a camera follows behind you. It's a bit strange. Hello, this episode is a bit more special. I've invited the newest member of the team who has gathered your questions about China and added the questions that interest him and our team. I say good evening to Mr. Dimitar Rusev. Hello.
Hi, Radushev. Thank you for the invitation. Why is the information from China that reaches us so scarce?
I've asked myself this question more than once. After spending some time in China, I can answer you. First, their internet is filtered to such an extent that it doesn't allow a single European application through. Personally, I'm uploading my videos and all my content to TikTok right now because when I was in China, I couldn't upload them even though I used a VPN as soon as I arrived. In other words, they have their own social networks where all the information is shared, and since a very small percentage of the population knows English, almost nothing reaches us. A very small percentage of our population actually knows Chinese. So the main reasons are the media, the filtering they do on the internet, the language barrier, and from a European perspective, the censorship and control imposed by Europe, since there is also a particularly strong filter from Europe to China. In my opinion, they do this in order to confuse the population and keep people unaware. I don't believe in conspiracies, but I think they deliberately filter the real information from China to Europe so that people don't know what's happening there.
Do you consider China to be the most advanced country? And if so, why?
It depends on how you define advanced. If we look at technology, in my opinion, they are the most developed country in the world right now. If we look from the perspective of scale of production, infrastructure, in that regard, China is definitely number 1. No other country is developing as quickly. A mere 30 years ago, they seemed to be significantly and noticeably lagging quite far behind compared to Europe. Now, in stark contrast, they seem incredibly advanced. So yes, China is without a single doubt the most rapidly developing country in the entire world in that regard.
What is the reason that China surpasses other countries?
There are many reasons, but in my opinion, the main ones are that they make decisions very quickly. Europe starts, discusses, takes many steps, and then begins to introduce various regulations. Whereas in China, it's not quite like that. They decide and act. The second main reason, in my opinion, is the absence of war. In the past 40 years, they have not participated in a single war. And while Europe spends a huge amount of energy on conflicts, on solving various problems related to crises, China simply builds, invests, refinances, and grows without interruption. Also in Europe, we suffer from a very seriously inefficient administration. And most importantly, the scale. When China decides to do something, thanks to strict discipline and the enormous resources at their disposal, they can accomplish things on a massive scale in a very short time. Something that in Europe happens very slowly due to the reasons I mentioned above. And the most important thing is the scale of investment. The Chinese government continuously invests in business on a massive scale. This is something that does not happen in Europe again because of a lack of focus. While Europe has certain rules that it constantly tries to follow, China has constant regulations.
What was your first day in China like?
That's a very interesting question. We landed at the airport and I had to check in. The first thing that happened to me was that they took my fingerprints, made me take a special photo with a camera, and I immediately noticed that in China there are particularly strict processes and procedures that they follow. Unlike, say, the airport in Turkey, right at the entrance to the airport in China, you can see that things there are very, very strictly regulated. Even though I had an eSIM card, it turned out that I couldn't use VoIP, which, for example, worked in Milan. I had used it just a week earlier. In other words, I couldn't make calls over the internet, over VoIP. Wi-Fi calling didn't work, and that's when I realized I was already cut off from all communications between China and the rest of the world. So the first thing that struck me was the serious wall they built, a protective barrier. Even though I was prepared, I had ExpressVPN, I had verified everything in advance, eSIM cards in several devices since I used 2 phones. Upon entering China, I noticed that I wouldn't be able to use these things the way they work in Europe without restrictions. A little later on, upon entering the main airport terminal itself, I had to go through the actual check-in process, where they carefully check all your documents and bags before departure for the next scheduled flight, since we were just transferring from our initial entry point in China to a connecting flight heading to Nanjing. It was quite a busy scene at the gate as we prepared for the final leg of our journey. And immediately the first thing that struck me was that there is very strict control for flying within China, which is much stricter than when flying into China, since they check the domestic passengers and they confiscated from me, just as from the whole group they took our batteries, which are the power banks. Mine was a gift from our partner Stilian Yanchev, my business partner, for my birthday. It's a Samsung, the latest model with all possible certifications, a power bank, but it doesn't have their CCC certificate, even though it says on it that it's made in China. Even though it has certifications for all kinds of countries, they just took it and threw it in the trash. After a lot of negotiations, I managed to leave it right at the check-in area and pay to have it stored for 30 days, because they wouldn't let me fly with it. After I realized I had no communications, couldn't make calls, and couldn't use my power bank. And an even more interesting fact is that I went out to leave my battery, and after 1 minute I came back in, the same employee checked me and went through the entire procedure with me again, the one I had to go through. In other words, I noticed that people there never cut corners with the rules. So if they have to check you and you pass through 8 times, they will check you 8 times for sure, regardless of the fact that they know you just went across the way a minute earlier and have already been checked. The control is very strict. We're talking about control, but no, they're not controlling the population. They're making sure there are no abuses. Basically, that's what happened to me. I noticed that there aren't any trash bins, yet everything is extremely clean. You see thousands of people, but you don't feel any chaos. Everything is very orderly. And then we entered the city Nanjing, and even though the city has nearly 10 million inhabitants, it was extremely quiet compared to, say, Sofia or Varna, which are 10 times smaller. It was extremely quiet. So I haven't lived during the time of communism, but I think that China isn't exactly communism. Right there, it is the best of communism and the best of democracy, integrated together into one single location.
Tell me about the Chinese people as individuals.
Maybe you know my slogan, that a person is as rich as the lives they've changed for the better, not by how much money they have in the bank. It turned out that this is a slogan that exists throughout the entire population in China. In other words, the Chinese deeply believe and feel that they should be able to help others, and they work entirely in the direction of helping others. During my entire stay in China, I did not encounter a single person who behaved badly, acted arrogantly, behaved inappropriately, or did anything that would hurt others. And generally speaking, people in China, regardless of whether they are doing business or simply working somewhere, are extremely helpful. I can tell you a few personal stories that made a strong impression on me. On one of my last days at the hotel, since I needed some hand cream, I asked one of the maids if it would be possible for her to find me some hand cream. I know that in many hotels, the more expensive rooms have creams that are left there. And she told me, I'm sorry, we don't have any. About 10 minutes later, there was a rather intense knocking on the door. The housekeeper had obviously gone and gotten 2 brand new hand creams from somewhere and brought them to me. Ah, all of China, everyone operates on this principle. I have a friend from China who was supposed to receive one of the batteries I bought, the power banks, because I forgot it at the hotel in Shanghai. When the hotel wrote to me to send the address, and she actually sent the address where they should send the battery, it turned out that they had damaged the battery for some reason. It is actually quite a large and heavy power bank. And I explained to her that they had unfortunately broken the battery. I told her that they were offering to send some money back as compensation, but since I cannot receive it myself, I asked if she could provide her Alipay account. Because they use Alipay for their transactions, they could send the money directly to her instead. And then she replied to me in this specific way, which I believe is a very clear and sufficient indicator of the way these people usually operate. Most likely the battery was broken by someone who found it. Accordingly, let's say it was the cleaning staff. Most likely this person does not get paid enough, and since this person does not get paid enough, if they have to pay for it, it might be a financial burden for them. That's why I don't want to receive it. Rather, if possible, refuse any compensation being given to us because I don't want to burden the person who found this battery. You probably know that in Bulgaria, this scenario is unlikely to play out the same way. People here are quite different.
What actually surprised you the most?
What I noticed is that everyone does their job on time. Nothing is delayed, and it's impossible to find someone just slacking off. And despite this extraordinary level of personal discipline and all the hard work, because in China, people really do work 6 full days every single week, often for 9 or even 10 long hours a day. Despite all this intense workload, people are remarkably happy. That's the first thing that impressed me. The second thing, which I didn't expect, was how much they've developed. I've heard about it, I've watched videos, but until you see it with your own eyes, you have no chance of truly understanding it. And the third thing I didn't expect is that people have become so accustomed to working that they are satisfied with their pace of life. The truth is, for many years now, I've been saying that people get used to working, to making an effort. In fact, work makes people feel good, but in China, they've turned it into their mission and they're happy, even though they work a lot. And last but not least, something that really impressed me, though I'll mention it last, is the extremely high level of digitalization. We're talking about statistically 900 million out of 1,400,000,000 people use only digital services 100%. But even if you find someone playing music on the street, if you want to give them 5 yuan, you have to send it to them digitally. They don't use fiat money. For some reason, the university gave us pocket money, and wherever I tried to pay in cash, they would accept it, but they looked at it as if they hadn't seen cash in months, and they would give me my change digitally. In other words, cash simply doesn't exist there. I couldn't find any ATMs. I didn't see a single ATM during my entire stay in China. Absolutely everything is 100% digitalized, which saves a lot of time and resources, and in my opinion, it would be good for that to happen here as well.
Do they use low-quality goods in China?
The top brands in the world are manufactured in China, starting all the way from specialized eyewear brands, then moving through those for, let's say, apparel and fashion clothing lines, across the entire global fashion industry, and eventually reaching all possible modern devices, including the sophisticated digital electronic devices that we use in our everyday lives nowadays. It's only logical that Chinese people have access to all global brands. On my very first night, I ended up in a mall that was huge, 9 stories tall. 2 separate buildings connected by a tunnel between them. On every floor there was a restroom, and I had never seen restrooms like these before. Each one has a different layout. For example, in one of them there was a person playing the piano. In other words, they are uniquely designed. And their malls? In this mall there wasn't a single European brand that didn't exist. A week earlier, I was in Milan. The mall we visited in Milan was 5 times smaller, and in this one, in China, there wasn't a single brand I could think of that wasn't there. And in this mall, we were the only Europeans. So, Nanjing is not seriously visited by Europeans. No one speaks English anywhere, let me emphasize that again. And the main customers of these European brands, global brands, are actually Chinese people. Since I checked out a few Omega watches whose prices I know, a few Rolexes, I looked around the Dolce & Gabbana store, and I can say that the prices in China are exactly the same as in Europe, and the Chinese are buying. The mall was packed, incredibly clean. So I definitely wouldn't say that the Chinese people don't use high-end products like iPhones, Mercedes-Benz cars, Armani suits, or Dolce & Gabbana fashion. In actual fact, if you look at the current market trends, the Chinese consumers actually tend to purchase and use much more high-quality luxury goods on a daily basis than most Europeans typically do nowadays. For them, it's a matter of honor. I didn't see a single Chinese person dressed cheaply. They have a kind of cult for brands and quality, and what we think, at least I used to have the impression, that there are only cheap goods there, is not true. Actually, the problem lies more with the European entrepreneur who orders low-quality goods, and in order to get a better price, the quality has to be lowered. The Chinese don't sell or use the products they export to us over there. There are also directives, as I mentioned earlier, regarding the batteries themselves. The batteries they sell there are not exported to Europe. In other words, the products they make for themselves are even higher quality than those intended for export. That's something I noticed. And here I'll share a story. I bought some Chinese perfumes, which in my opinion are not cheap at all. I decided to give one to my friend from China, and she looked at it and said, "You can use this perfume to spray your room and make it smell nice." Then she decided to give me one of hers and showed it to me. Actually, the reason I couldn't find an original Chinese perfume was that I didn't know where to look, and I was searching at some market we went to. I was looking in some Chinese mall, so in reality, I don't know where to buy it from. We were visiting tourist spots where these things aren't available, and it turned out that she, as someone with an average salary, uses a perfume that costs about 6,000 yuan, which is 700 euros. That's how much her perfume costs, and actually from that you can directly draw the analogy that products in China aren't all low quality. Even more interesting was that I bought my father a 3-head shaver from Xiaomi, which was the most expensive one in the store. Let's say it cost 700 or 800 yuan, which is about 100 euros. Xiaomi products are quite, or Xiaomi, as everyone pronounces it differently these days. I don't know what the correct way to say it is. And when I showed it to her, she said, well, look, we have a much better Chinese brand. And she showed me some razors that started at 10,000 yuan, which means we're talking about 1,000 euros and up. And now many viewers will say, well, not all Chinese people are like that. Well, yes, of course not. Everyone is like that. But the middle class in China doesn't wear junk. They don't wear synthetic clothing. I even made a post about some synthetic clothes I found in the mall. A bit later, when I got to know people from China, I actually saw that they wear merino wool, they wear Egyptian cotton, and they don't wear synthetic fabrics at all. In other words, the middle class and business class there are in no way inferior in terms of the quality of materials and products they use compared to us, let's say, Europeans.
What do you think about the cameras? Are there any, and if so, do they monitor things?
There are cameras everywhere. China has about 60% of all cameras produced worldwide are in China. There are about 600 to 700 million cameras according to the latest count, and all of them operate on two principles. Either they have integrated artificial intelligence that recognizes everyone in real time. That's why they scanned me at the entrance. They recognize you even if you're wearing a mask because they can see the distance between your eyes and between your eyes and your nose. They are very advanced in this technology. When I say very, I mean they are, in my opinion, the most advanced in recognition technology. However, this is not to monitor people. I'm absolutely certain about this. It's to prevent any possible violations. In other words, the purpose of the cameras in China is that they monitor everything in real time. And that's exactly what makes China the safest place a person can visit on our planet. There, you can be completely at ease, 100% peace of mind. I can ask my colleagues here to show it. When I was texting with that girl about the battery, later we were talking about various things, and then the topic came up about what people do when they're at the beach and need to go home, but there's nowhere to leave their luggage. They simply make a circle around it. Now, while my colleagues are showing the photos, they make a circle around their clothes and leave. And when they come back after 5 or 10 days, their clothes are still on the beach, just as they left them. You can leave your phone, your bag, and your money, make a little circle around them in the sand, and you know that if you come back after 2 days, everything will still be there. Where in our region can you leave your belongings on the beach and find them after 2 hours? That could never happen. So it's precisely these cameras that make China one of the safest, if not the safest, places in the world. And what's even more interesting is that this happens even if you leave your mobile phone, you can come back after 3 days and it will still be there. The chance of someone stealing something from you is practically zero.
And what about the infrastructure in China? What's the difference between their roads and ours?
There's a tunnel they built in just 2 months. We couldn't build it in 10 years in Bulgaria. As I mentioned earlier about the trains, they have a very serious infrastructure. I was extremely impressed that I could actually put 2 euros on the edge of the window, and while the train was moving at 300, the 2 euros didn't fall. It really works. It's not just a theory. In other words, we're moving at 300 kilometers per hour and the euro coin doesn't budge. Starting with the subway, 46 cities in China have a metro system. 46 cities, which is an incredible number. I don't know how you imagine that. The subway is designed so that it's everywhere, in every part of the city. There are dozens of lines underground. It's extremely cheap. When I say extremely cheap, I mean just a few cents. You can travel from one end of the city to the other. That's something we can't even come close to in Europe. The level of control at the airports is very high. The cities are smart. I couldn't find a single burnt-out light bulb. There was a time when, for an hour and a half traveling in Nanjing, I was looking at light bulbs, bulb after bulb after bulb, and I kept thinking there has to be at least one that's burnt out. But to travel all night and not see a single burnt-out bulb? It really leaves a truly profound and lasting impression. And when it comes to the sheer scale of infrastructure projects like those, we simply cannot even begin to come close to matching it, if I may say so. Here, in our group, we were with Associate Professor Tsarisky, who said that one of the things he looks at economically in a megapolis, let's say, or in a country to determine if it's doing well, is how the toilets look. I'll just mention here that when I went to different establishments, in some of them the toilets were so digitalized that they could tell whether you were going to pee or poop and would open accordingly depending on what you were about to do. So you don't have to open the lid, it opens by itself, closes by itself after you, the plastic cover changes automatically, it self-cleans, and you just leave. There are no brushes or anything like that used there. It's designed so that it cleans up after you without you having to touch anything. Like those in the mall I was telling you about earlier, they have 12 to 15 buttons, starting from heating to cooling. I'm not sure if there's a massage function, I just played around a bit, trying to translate the buttons. In other words, a toilet with a touch screen, if you haven't seen one, and 15 control buttons, you can only see that in China. The truth is, we didn't find a dirty place there. In other words, a dirty restroom practically doesn't exist. And the most interesting thing is that this has happened in China in no more than 35 to 40 years. So while here in Bulgaria, we've been trying for 20 years to build a 300-kilometer stretch of road, these people are building a skyscraper every 5 days and are handling the expansion of their infrastructure incredibly quickly.
And what preconceptions did you have about China before you left, and which of them turned out to be wrong?
I thought that people in China were more like slaves. I lived with the idea that they were more like slaves. I had heard all sorts of things about how they are exploited, how they live on just a bowl of rice. I had heard that they couldn't travel from city to city. I had heard that there is a social credit system that makes them slaves, and they can't leave. They can't cross the street without using a crosswalk because it will be recorded by a camera and their social status will be lowered. I had the wrong idea that, in general, socialism works to enslave people. All of these notions were shattered literally within a week. Within a week, I was convinced. The last thing I managed to debunk was around the 10th day, regarding the social credit system, because I sat down with a reliable source and we talked for several hours about whether there really is a social credit system, whether there really are indicators by which they can cut off your funding, for example, or stop your salary, or fine you. But now I can say with 100% certainty that there are absolutely no bans in China. Even the ban on having children was lifted a few years ago. So right now this is allowed for them in unlimited quantities.
What can you tell me about children in China?
I can tell you that children in China are like machines. There is enormous pressure on them. They take a test, which I wrote down the name of. It's called Gaokao, which is taken only once, and in fact, this test determines their entire life. There are 3 times more children who are at a world-class level in mathematics, and the fact is that these children then grow up very quickly, very intelligent, and later they produce trains that travel at 330 kilometers per second per hour. And here the real question is, what are we doing in Bulgaria while they are studying? Because their children, unlike ours, do not spend more than an hour a day with a phone in their hand. There it's forbidden per day. And I personally saw 2,000 children exercising at the same time in a stadium. 2,000. You can't even imagine how many that is. So they have some very interesting, very strict laws, which, however, build serious discipline and really help people there become better individuals.
Is it true that prices in China can be undercut?
Yes, the state regulates things and businesses there focus on quality and quantity, not on price, which I think should happen here as well, because if we keep going the way we are, we'll never have a real business. So yes, absolutely. Compared to Europe, your competition in China has nothing to do with prices. In other words, the Chinese model says don't compete on price, compete on the product. You look for a higher quality product, not how to make a lower price, right?
Tell me about the biggest pharmaceutical factory you visited in China.
I'm not sure if it's the biggest, but it's one of the largest.
Can you tell me more about the pharmaceutical factory?
Yes, we visited one of the largest pharmaceutical factories in the world, which produces dietary supplements, health supplements, and they even make rakia. They produce a lot of things, mostly alcohol, Chinese alcohol. From the entrance of the factory to the hall where we met, we traveled 40 minutes by cart. 18,000 people work there. They have plantations of about 80,000 acres of their own, with which they produce their products. They maintain an impressive on-site museum where they proudly display a large part of their historical items, explaining exactly what they are made of and which specific scientist actually invented them. Furthermore, we attended a formal official dinner hosted at their Grand Hotel, specifically located within their elegant primary restaurant. Besides everything else, they have hotels and restaurants, which I assume are for their guests. They are extremely courteous. The factory has over 1,000 products, and just their latest one alone had over 2 million sales on the very first day. Their scale is enormous. They have a separate department for every single type of certificate you can imagine. So if we need the product for America, they have certificates for America. If we need it for Europe, they have certificates for Europe. And in this way, they have departments for every single thing, regardless of whether it's a dietary supplement or a pharmaceutical product. Even though our volume is very small, they see us as a gateway to Europe. Very responsive. I wrote this on Facebook, but I'll share it here as well. I asked the translator when we were at the restaurant where I could get those chopsticks they used to eat with, since the restaurant was very high-end. And I was looking for them for my niece, who has been studying Chinese for several years and is a big fan of Chinese culture and tradition, so she wants some. I asked her what I should get when I go to China. She said, I just want chopsticks. So I was looking for some nice ones. And since I didn't know where to buy them, I asked. What struck me was that the interpreter went over and said something to the director with whom we were actually having dinner. He interrupted his dinner, ran to the kitchen, and came back about 10 minutes later with a set of chopsticks. That is an exceptional gesture. It really shows how responsive people are. In Bulgaria, you probably realize that this wouldn't happen like that. Most likely, our average businessman who has managed to get to the point of owning a restaurant would just shout to the waitress, go bring some cutlery, a set of cutlery, and most likely this businessman would be operating on a scale 4 or 5 digits smaller than that factory he's talking about. The factory has an annual turnover of 120 billion yuan. So what we can take from them is that in fact this enormous scale is achieved solely and exclusively by people. The only way to achieve something great is to have the right people with you, people who are there to do the work, not just to take the money. The money comes later. First comes the work. As you may have already started to notice in your own life, you have to do the work first, and then the money follows.
And what did you see at the camera factory?
We visited one of the largest. I think it was either the biggest or the second biggest factory in the world. They didn't allow us to film. The factory produces cameras, starting from security cameras, cameras for safety, and even for automobiles. They manufacture traffic lights, charging stations, drones, and robots. It took us about 3 hours to go through more or less quickly the exhibition area of the factory. They didn't allow us to film because there are quite a few prototypes that they only show to people who visit in person. The overall scale of this is extraordinarily massive. You can work with these people. The question again is, there needs to be a strategy. They have become so big because they operate on principle and follow everything that a business needs to observe as good ethics in order to grow.
In this regard, tell me more about the technologies in China.
I've already mentioned the technologies like the toilets. I expected a bit more robots. There are robots, but not that many. There are autonomous vehicles, but again, not that many. Maybe in 10 or 15 years they will be fully integrated. But technologically they are very advanced, especially when it comes to electric vehicles. As far as I know, there are over 60 electric vehicle brands. They have cars without batteries, and the battery is rented. You just swap it out and keep going. That's their innovation. The cities are very quiet precisely because of these technologies. All the residents get around either by metro or with electric bikes and electric scooters. They're called e-motors. They have a short range, they're cheap, lightweight, move very quickly, and in my opinion, technologically, they're number one in the world right now. I mean, I could go on all day about technology, but the things I saw there, elevators that go up 500 meters in 50 seconds, buildings that are constructed in just a few years. Here, we probably couldn't build them even in 100 years. Roads, 4 or 5 lane roads in one direction, built under the river. Infrastructure that, as far as I know, doesn't exist anywhere in Europe, and I don't know if there's anything like it anywhere else in the States either. Tens of kilometers of highway, where along the side of the highway everywhere there are flower pots with an irrigation system. So technologically there are no potholes in their asphalt. It's very rare to encounter any bumps. This means that even their asphalt technology is out of this world. I don't know if you know, but unlike us, where if someone from Europe happens to make it to space, we beat our chests, they have launched more satellites even though their space exploration started later. They have also traveled to various planets, and if you start reading a bit more in depth, now, I won't state any facts because I don't know them by heart and I don't want to get anything wrong. Their astronauts are no less prepared than ours. In other words, the technology they have is extraterrestrial, I'll call it that.
Is it true that you have a girlfriend from China?
Yes, I've mentioned it to you a few times.
Does she know English? How do you actually communicate?
She doesn't know English. Maybe 1 or 2 sentences that at first might fool you into thinking her English is good, but the truth is she doesn't know English. We communicate through a translator, Google Translate, in real time, and mainly through artificial intelligence.
Tell me more about the value system of the Chinese people.
In every respect, the value system of the people there is very, very strong. They all believe in a better future and work towards a better future. And even though when you start talking to them, they claim that things are difficult for them, things are hard for them, but they like their lives. That's what's really interesting there. While for us, things are easy, but we don't like our lives, we're the opposite.
What do you think about the media in China?
I think they are completely filtered. There you have no chance to do anything outside of the filtration. There is complete control over Google, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and this great firewall actually works. But here's the paradox. They have their own means of communication, which are alternatives to ours. They have WeChat instead of WhatsApp. They have Weibo instead of Twitter. They have Baidu instead of Google. And actually, they have Bilibili instead of YouTube. And all of these work perfectly, so they're not interested in Western media. At the same time, they have control over them, and there is no propaganda. Unlike the West, they simply have a filter for these things. So this propaganda that is present in Europe doesn't exist in China. And what does it matter if you have an internet filter, if in the end you live well, live safely, and don't face high risks? Ultimately, that's what's important, for people to live well.
Are prices low in China?
Yes, they are low, and it's understandable why. Because they produce their own electricity, it's normal for it to be cheap. They produce their own technology, it's normal for it to be inexpensive. When you don't have imports, when you don't have tariffs, when you don't have excise duties, when the raw materials are yours, when the product is yours, when you've closed the entire cycle, it's always cheaper than making something externally. So the closed production cycle definitely works towards keeping prices low. The second important thing is that the state invests heavily in business. They have a huge amount of subsidies. And the third important thing is scale. There's no way we can't lower the price when we increase the scale. They work with very high technology. Everything is robotized. And here I'll give a few examples. The battery I bought from there is twice as cheap as in Europe. And it's an even better model. It's not available in Europe. Taxis cost just a few euros. For 20 or 30 kilometers, you can get by for 5 or 6 euros. And the food at a neighborhood restaurant, let's say if you and I sit down for dinner with 20 euros, we wouldn't be able to get up from the table. We're talking about a restaurant. And free food delivery in the bigger cities within 3 minutes is a fact. So yes, it's cheaper, and the quality isn't lower either.
I wonder what decision you made after returning from China that you wouldn't have made if you hadn't gone.
First, I decided to start doing my production directly in China. In all likelihood, it is very probable that I will end up replacing every single one of the Bulgarians I currently work with. Because when you consider their current scale of operations and the overall quality of their work, if we can successfully negotiate the right terms for me, I am absolutely certain that I will be much more satisfied in the long run, at least at first glance. I came to the profound realization that, in fact, technology in China is incredibly sophisticated and highly advanced, and that the sole reason why I had previously thought the quality of the goods was low comes from the persistent negative propaganda in Europe. We only import low-quality goods from China and constantly talk about how bad it is. But that was 30 years ago. Today, it's not like that. And actually, my decision to go to China might be one of the best in my life because it opened completely new doors for me. Now I know people who are engaged in serious manufacturing. I know people who are doing serious business in China. And I believe that we can build a very successful business thanks to this. I just hadn't realized how important scale is. In a factory in China, the scale is so huge. They can afford much better terms for any business. And if we don't push them on price, but rather negotiate for good quality, we'll get a product that's no worse than what we would get in Europe. I'll give you an example. If you go now to a Bulgarian manufacturer and ask them to make a certain product, they will most likely use Chinese machines, Chinese bottles, Chinese raw materials, and in the end, it will say, made in Europe. The quality won't be any different, but you won't like the price because he works on a small scale, he buys in small quantities, and the likelihood that the final product will be of the same quality, but at a much higher price, is high. So it's definitely better for someone to check if they can have things produced in China as well, to compare, because many things, well, not many, but not everything can be produced there.
You say that Bulgaria is 200 years behind. Who is actually to blame? Is it us, the entrepreneurs, or the system?
Well, it's complex. First, there's the laziness among people. Maybe you've noticed you're a young person yourself. You notice what percentage of the people around you are hardworking. Let's start from there. The majority are asleep. And when all your classmates are lazy, there's no way for you to develop a work ethic. You can't be surrounded by lazy people and still have a strong work ethic yourself. Then there's the system itself. The state makes it so that people remain asleep. The state gives them too many breaks, too much vacation time. And then there are the entrepreneurs. We entrepreneurs ourselves tolerate people taking advantage of us, sleeping until noon, leaving work early, making up sick days. And as long as we stay firmly focused on this specific type of activity, actively encouraging people in the workforce to keep neglecting their essential job duties and professional responsibilities, and if we lack vision and long-term thinking, then most likely we won't be able to overcome this problem either. And last but not least, we ourselves as people, while the Chinese person works 70 hours a week and is happy to give his best, the Bulgarian probably works 45 hours under a labor contract. not even 40. How much is 172 hours? How much is that per week? 40-something hours. And he complains, and out of those 40-something hours, he actually works 15. And when we hear him, he complains that he works too much and that he gets paid too little. So as long as we don't work efficiently and productively and just keep complaining, for sure, not just 200, but even 300 years, we'll lag behind the Chinese.
As an entrepreneur, can you tell me what is the biggest advantage that China has over Europe?
Yes, of course, they have the most raw materials. Well, Africa also has raw materials, but they process their own raw materials. In other words, they have advanced technology, they have raw materials, and actually, what do? They receive good funding from the government and surpass all other countries, because even when we want to produce an electric car, we still end up buying batteries from the Chinese. So, purely economically, they are the most advanced because the raw materials are with them, the technology is with them, and at the end of the day, they produce whatever they need and are completely self-sufficient as an economy.
What are the 3 things you wouldn't like about China as a European?
I couldn't get used to the food, even though they eat very high-quality food. They have pork, duck, fish, they have everything. Their fruits are incredibly tasty. I just couldn't get used to the food. And I'll say what's missing. What's missing is Bulgarian ayran. We miss our salads, we miss the sweets that we occasionally have. We miss having salt on the table. Basically, what's missing is our food. Maybe you get used to it. I was only there for a very short period of time. The second thing is that no one speaks English, so I had to start learning Chinese now. The language barrier is serious. They don't understand us, and we don't understand them. We have to make an effort to establish some kind of contact with them. It's a bit difficult. Maybe you need to go with a translator if you want to do serious business or learn Chinese, which I've already figured out. In a year, I'll be speaking Chinese. I won't understand the characters because I'm skipping everything written, but that will save me 2 or 3 years of studying. I don't even have the desire to write in their language right now because that's 5,500 characters to memorize. That's a lot of information, especially for a busy person. And maybe the third thing that really bothered me is the control, because no matter what we say, you're walking down the street and a little machine with a camera is following behind you. It's a bit strange, but they confiscated my battery, which was completely fine. Things like that, I would say, are not okay. It's not that you can't get used to it. I would get used to it too, but it's a bit too much for me.
After these 10 weeks in China, can you confirm the saying that China lives in the future while Europe lives in the past?
Yes, but with one important clarification. Europe doesn't live in the past. It lives in the comfort of its past. And that's a problem. That's even more dangerous.
What is the one thing from China that, if we introduced it in Bulgaria, would bring about fundamental changes?
It's what I keep repeating. China isn't rich because it has money, but because it works hard and in the right direction. So if we remove the ineffective people and start working hard, we will definitely see a uniquely high jump in productivity. So we need to stop feeding our egos and working through them and realize that everything comes from hard work.
And what would you say to Bulgarian entrepreneurs who underestimate China?
That while they're laughing at China's so-called junk, in reality, China currently has both the raw materials and the technology, and they're working wonders.
If, let's say, you return to China in 10 years, what do you think you would find there?
In the future, we will most likely see advanced vehicles that can soar through the sky, highly intelligent autonomous robots, and even ultra-high-speed magnetic levitation trains that connect our cities faster than ever before.
And what is China doing today that Europe stopped doing long ago?
China builds without asking for permission. It invests in manufacturing. It respects the labor of working people. It thinks in a very long-term perspective and closes the loop from raw materials to production. It completes the entire cycle.
Did you personally come back from China with a concrete proposal or partnership?
Yes, I am expecting exclusive rights for certain products. I am still waiting for them, and I decided to move all my production to China for the gold focus.
Just imagine for a moment, if you could send a message to yourself before boarding the plane, what exactly would that message be?
Get on board without overthinking it. Everything you know about China is wrong.
And what was the moment of culture shock when you returned?
We sat down for coffee in Studentsky Grad before I got on the bus to go back to Schumann. And right as I was entering the restroom, before I even got into the men's room, a rag flew out of the women's restroom. I saw a hand, it fell into the sink, and at that exact moment I thought, I'm back in Bulgaria.